Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolute foundations of English literature. Now, if you're picturing dusty, boring old books, you gotta think again. We are talking about a highly dramatic, visceral world filled with fierce warriors, terrifying monsters, and an inescapable sense of destiny. This is the Anglo Sexon Period. It's an era that literally shaped the English language and our literary traditions in ways that are still echoing today. So let's step back in time together and see how this incredible period shaped the very words we're using right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for the journey. First, the invasion of warrior tribes. Second, the mystery of Old English. Third, fate, loyalty, and epics. Fourth, pagans meet Christian monks. Fifth, Beowulf and the Greats. And finally, legacy and the end.
Let's start with Section 1, Invasion of Warrior Tribes. A Roman power vacuum. We need to set the stage here, and honestly, the stage is complete chaos. It's the 5th century, and the mighty Roman Empire, which had controlled Britain for centuries, has just packed up and abandoned the island. They left behind this massive power vacuum, leaving the native Britons incredibly vulnerable.
To really anchor ourselves in time here, the era we're looking at spans from roughly 450 AD, when the invasions first kicked off, stretching over 6 centuries until a very definitive, very brutal end in 1066 AD. And right in the middle there, around the 6th century, you'll see a massive cultural shift as Christianity starts to spread. But, it all begins with those initial invasions.
So, who actually crossed the treacherous seas to fill that huge power vacuum left by the Romans? Well, it was 3 main Germanic tribes: the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They crashed onto the shores of England and brought a highly specific way of life with them. This was absolutely not some refined, civilized society like the Romans had built. No way. This was a harsh, intensely tribal, warrior-based culture. Survival of the fittest wasn't just a phrase, it was literally their daily reality.
Moving to Section 2, the mystery of Old English, a linguistic puzzle. When these warrior tribes settled down, they obviously brought their language with them. And that actually became the bedrock of the English we speak today. But if you were to look at it now, it might completely shock you.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question. If a poem like Beowulf is the ultimate masterpiece of early English literature, why can't the average English speaker actually read it today? I mean, it's supposed to be English, right?
Well, the truth is, Old English is drastically different from modern English. Honestly, it looks and sounds a whole lot more like modern German or Icelandic. To you and me today, the original text of a poem like Beowulf looks completely alien. Without a dedicated translator, these epic texts are, for all intents and purposes, totally unreadable to us. It's like trying to crack a secret code.
Now for Section 3, fate, loyalty, and epics, mead halls and warriors. Let's think about how these warriors actually entertain themselves. Keep in mind there are 0 screens, no printing presses, no books whatsoever. Picture this. It's a freezing, pitch-black night. The only warmth is a roaring fire inside a massive wooden mead hall, and the entire tribe is packed in together.
In that mead hall, the oral poets were basically the rock stars of their day. Stories were memorized and passed down entirely by word of mouth by these incredibly skilled storytellers. And here is a super crucial detail. They did not use rhyme. Nope. Instead, they relied heavily on alliteration, repeating those initial consonant sounds. That rhythmic, pounding beat made the epic tales of heroism so much easier to memorize and just incredibly dramatic to listen to. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a vital concept called word. This was literally the engine driving the entire Anglo-Saxon worldview. Word translates roughly to fate, but it's way heavier than that. It's the deeply held belief that your ultimate destiny, which was usually a violent death in battle, is completely predetermined. You simply cannot escape it. So the ultimate heroic ideal wasn't about surviving, it was about accepting your fate with absolute bravery. Free will wasn't about dodging your destiny, it was all about how courageously you faced it when it arrived.
And that intense belief in fate feeds directly into our next concept, comitatus. If weird was your relationship to the universe, comitatus was your relationship to the guy standing next to you. It defines this unbreakable, ride-or-die loyalty between a brave warrior and his king or lord. The setup was simple. A lord provided wealth, weapons, and protection, and in return, the warrior fought to the absolute death for him. To abandon your lord in the middle of a battle, that was the ultimate disgrace. By showing this immense loyalty and bravery, a warrior hoped to achieve fame, because in their eyes, fame was the only real form of immortality.
Which brings us to Section 4,
Pagans meet Christian monks, a cultural collision. Okay, so everything changes in the 6th century. This hardcore warrior society, completely driven by fate and bloodshed, hits a massive turning point when a totally new theology arrives on the island.
This cultural collision completely defines the literature of the era. On one side, you've got these deeply rooted pagan ideals, heroism, the relentless pursuit of fame, and the dark inevitability of fate. On the other side, the Christian influence arrives, monks bringing the written word, Latin scholarship, and the moral concepts of good versus evil. And here's the beautiful irony of the whole thing. Without those Christian monks physically writing these stories down, the oral pagan epics of the Anglo Saxons would have literally vanished into thin air. The monks preserved the pagan epics, but as they did, they naturally wove their own Christian values right into the text.
Let's look at Section 5, Beowulf and the Greats, Monumental Literature. It's time to talk about the heavy hitters born from this unique blend of warrior culture and monastic scholarship.
You simply cannot talk about the Anglo Saxon period without talking about Beowulf. It is the absolute greatest epic of the period, the ultimate crowning achievement of hero-centered literature. It's the gripping story of an insanely brave warrior who sails across the sea just to throw down with terrifying monsters. But beneath all that monster-fighting action, it perfectly captures the era's biggest themes: the epic struggle between good and evil, the desperate pursuit of glory, and that ultimate, inescapable reality of death.
And this brilliantly illustrates the other major figures shaping the intellectual landscape beyond just Beowulf. You have Cædmon, who is famous for his religious poetry, like Cædmon's Hymn. Then there's Cynewulf, who authored these beautifully complex Christian poems. And crucially, we have King Alfred the Great. Now, he wasn't just a military genius. He was a total visionary who actually took the time to translate Latin prose into English. That was a huge game changer. It cemented Old English as a legitimate language for serious scholarship and record-keeping.
But it wasn't all just epic monster fights and triumphant hymns. The Anglo-Saxons also produced these profoundly moving, incredibly sad poems known as elegies. Two of the most famous are The Wanderer and The Seafarer. Think back for a second to Comitatus, that intense loyalty to a lord. If your lord died in battle and your tribe was suddenly scattered, you were left entirely alone in a very brutal world. These elegies deeply explore those heartbreaking themes of loneliness, exile, and loss. They reflect on the transience of life, painting a very somber picture of a world where, eventually, everything you love just fades away.
And finally, Section 6, Legacy and the End, an abrupt conclusion. Despite having this incredibly vibrant literary tradition, the Anglo-Saxon period was fated to have a very, very sudden ending.
The year 1066 AD is genuinely one of the most important dates in all of human history. Literally, this entire heroic age, this 600-year saga of Old English, roaring mead halls, and warrior kings, was completely wiped out by the Norman conquest. French-speaking Normans crossed the Channel, defeated the last Anglo-Saxon king, and permanently altered the culture, the ruling class, and the English language forever. Just like that, the Old English period was officially over.
So, the crucial point is, here is your ultimate golden cheat sheet of takeaways. Remember that their epic poetry prioritized pounding alliteration over rhyme. Remember that their literature transitioned from an oral tradition told by the firelight to a written tradition painstakingly maintained by monks. It's this fascinating, messy blend of pagan warrior ideals and Christian theology. And, of course, it all definitively comes to a crashing halt in 1066.
The Anglo-Saxon era might have ended nearly 1,000 years ago, but I want you to consider their defining values for a second. How much of our modern worldview, our massive blockbuster movies, our military codes, even our own personal sense of duty, is still actively shaped by these ancient concepts of word and comitatus? The Old English language might require a translator today, but the epic human themes they wrestled with, those are still incredibly relevant. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the stories we tell today.